I really don't know how that happened, and it's kind of amazing. I'm not necessarily saying that it was written this way because male authors think about women's breasts too much, but the shoe might be suspiciously close to the right size. Boys, you know what I mean? They only ever think about one thing, and it's treasure. Hello fellow readers, book lovers, and whoever else is watching this. I'm Emily at Midnight. Welcome to my channel. As an avid fantasy reader, I've been thinking about reading the Wheel of Time series for a while now. But like many prospective readers, I've been daunted by the size of the series. There are 14 books in the series, making it a combined 11,898 pages, if you include the prequel, which I just learned about in the process of calculating this number. It has a total of 4,410,036 words, if the internet can be trusted. I didn't count. That's huge. But here's the deal. I've read the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson, which currently has 4 books making up 5,087 pages. And it's only 4 books so far, and it's gonna be 10. So if I'm willing to commit to a series that big, then I know I can handle this one too. I also work in the fantasy publishing world, and my job sends me to JordanCon, the convention celebrating Robert Jordan's works, as well as other fantasy books. So I decided it's about time I put my big kid pants on and finally read the series. And what better and more entertaining way to read it than to read it and then review it with you? And what better way to review it than to review the book and the TV series together? So here's what I'm going to do. In this video, I'm going to review Wheel of Time Book 1, The Eye of the World. I'm going to tell you all of my thoughts, questions, critiques, and favorite things about the book. Then, in a separate video, I'm going to review the TV series, discussing how it represented the book, the changes that they made, and my thoughts about them, as well as share my opinion on how it tells its story divorced from the book. So consider this video my review of The Wheel of Time Book 1, The Eye of the World, Part 1. The book. Before we dive in though, I really feel like we need like a glossary. In this book there are so many names of places and things that all sound the same, so take note. Egwene, Moiraine, and Elaine are all separate people, and Tarvalin and ta'veren are very separate things. Tarvalin is a place, it's where the Aes Sedai are, which is a magical sect in this book, and it's a place that the gang is headed towards for a significant portion of this book. ta'veren, on the other hand, is a thing that a person can be. According to the Wheel of Time wiki, ta'veren are people around whom the Wheel of Time specifically weaves the pattern with all surrounding life threads. No one is born ta'veren, the pattern turns one ta'veren when there's a need, and you only remain that way until you've fulfilled your purpose. So, very separate things. And I've made this handy-dandy reference for our main characters. My stylus is Nightblood, if you know, you know. Alright, let's start off with our main character. We've got Rand, who's about 18 years old. He's a hardworking sheep herder, and he's the son of a sheep herder. His father is Tamlin al'Thor. No, not that Tamlin. Bad. We like this one. Up next, we have Matt, who is also around 18. He's the town clown. He's always pulling pranks on people and telling kids made-up stories. He's also Rand's closest friend. Then we have Perrin, also around 18. He's an apprentice at the blacksmith shop. He's super strong and very contemplative, but the villagers tend to think of him as mentally slow because he takes a long time to make decisions and doesn't talk very often. Next, we have Moiraine. She's an Aes Sedai who came to their village knowing that these 3 gents were of interest to the Dark One, the big baddie. Aes Sedai are powerful wizards that can use the one power, which from what I can tell is just like all magic, all power, but also like the creator's power specifically. All Aes Sedai at the time of this book are women, because when men use the one power, they get tainted by the Dark One and turn evil, go mad, die, or all 3. Next we have Lan, a warder, which is a kind of swordsman bound to an Aes Sedai. This bunch seems to share some kind of power from the Aes Sedai to the warder, potentially making them stronger and allowing them to be somewhat aware of one another. Are they alive, roughly where they are, and maybe more. The warder then does everything in his power to protect his Aes Sedai, just like the Aes Sedai protects the warder. Next we have Nynaeve, the town's wisdom, which is basically like an herbalist or sage, but like maybe with some magic wrapped in there. More on that later. Wisdoms are usually older, kind of like town elders, but Nynaeve isn't. She's like mid-20s, I think. And apparently she hits people with her staff if they call her too young to be a wisdom. Then we've got Egwene, a girl from their village as well. I think she's the mayor's daughter. She's been doing a little bit of training with Nynaeve in the ways of a wisdom, and she notably has a little bit of a romance with Rand here, but she also wants to have adventures and leave her small town and live a full and exciting life. Lastly, we have Thom Merrilin. He is a traveling gleeman, which which is a very official kind of bard. They wear brightly patched cloaks like he's pictured to have here. They tell stories and sing songs and are a very revered form of entertainment. If they offer to play somewhere, then often they get room and board free and get paid on top of that. So it's a very respected lifestyle. All right, that's enough for the board for now. We'll be adding people later, but just so you know, I'm using almost exclusively fan art, and so I will be crediting the authors in the description below. So if you like any of this art, be sure to go check out the artists. They're all very talented. All right, let's dive into the book. We start out the book with Rand and his father Tamlin, still not that one, I'm just gonna call him Tam from now on, walking their cart to the nearby village, Aemond's Field, which they are citizens of. They're going there for the big spring festival, the 𝕊𝕠𝕔𝕒𝕒 festival, but on the road, Rand notices a man following them on horseback in a black cloak with the cowl covering his face. And Rand just feels this deep, seething hatred coming from this man. When Rand turns around to tell his father about this man, however, the man on horseback disappears. Mat, Rand's closest friend, is the first person Rand tells outside of his father as soon as they get to town about having seen this man. Mat is shocked and says that he saw the man too, but no one would believe him because he's the town prankster. And I just have to say, obviously seeing this like rider in black on horseback is the trigger for Rand's hero's journey to start. And knowing that, I was so happy that Mat saw him too. It was giving all the happy Frodo doesn't have to go alone to Mordor vibes, and I'm so here for it. Okay, also something kind of funny happens around here as Mat is talking to Rand. Mat makes a comment about how your imagination can run wild with you and how he got himself thinking that it might be the Dark One himself. And then this happens. Rand took a deep breath, as much to remind himself as for any other reason. He said by rote, "The Dark One and all the Forsaken are bound in 𝕊𝕗𝕂 ℂ𝕣𝕒, beyond the Great Blight, bound by the Creator at the moment of creation, bound until the end of time. The hand of the Creator shelters the world and the light shines on us all." It's just, okay, saying something by rote to ward off evil, I don't mind that at all. Totally cool, world building, culture building, whatever. I just had to laugh at the length of that. It just felt too long and clunky to be something that you say by rote. It felt just a little bit more like an expo dump than a cultural moment. That's just my personal opinion. But back to their mysterious man predicament. As it turns out, Mat and Rand weren't the only ones who saw him. Another boy their age, Perrin, also saw him, but no one else has. While they're unraveling this, the town council is meeting to discuss if this is real or not, if it's a concern, and also to finish planning for the festival that's happening the next day. Meanwhile, Rand, Perrin, and Mat meet this beautiful woman who just came to stay in their inn. They also meet this strong and tall man named Lan, who's traveling with her, and Moiraine gives each of the 3 boys a silver coin. That night, Tam and Rand return to their farm for the night rather than staying for the festival the next day, because Tam is very worried about the things that the boys saw and whatever it might be that's going on. At home, Tam pulls out a sword that Rand has never seen before and didn't even know his father owned. It has a heron mark on the hilt, which will be important later. Rand was surprised not only that Tam owned this sword, since no one in the Two Rivers area, where Aemond's Field, their town, is, typically owns weapons because they've never needed them, but also that Tam is clearly more worried than he'd previously let on. Pretty much right after that, their home is attacked by Trollocs, which are these weird, like, beast things that have, like, foxes' heads, or goats' heads, or hogs' heads, or wolves' heads, and different animal parts as well, but they walk upright. They aren't uniform in any way as a species, but are more recognized by how monstrous they are. They're super strong and carry clubs or hooks to grab people with and unalive things for the fun of it. Tam fights off the first one and tells Rand to run, so they end up separated in the woods running from the Trollocs. Eventually, Tam finds his father and he's wounded from fighting the Trollocs, but they both seem to have lost them for now. Rand quickly realizes that he needs to get Tam to town to be healed by Nynaeve, the Wisdom. So he takes Tam's sword, extra courage, and heads back to the house to get food, cloth to bind Tam's wounds, and the cart so he can take Tam into town. At first, he thinks he's lucky and the Trollocs have all left the house, but there's one lurking in the corner, and it charges at Rand. And by sheer luck, Rand got the sword up in time, and the Trolloc ended up running on the sword instead of mauling Rand. And the Trolloc collapses on top of Rand, no longer alive. Rand hurries to get the supplies that he's looking for, though unfortunately there wasn't much in the way of cloth or food that hadn't been totally ransacked and destroyed by the Trollocs. He grabs what he can and runs to the barn to get the cart, only to find that that too has been absolutely destroyed by the Trollocs, and all of the animals have either been loosed or unalived, and he doesn't know what to do. He decides to take the 2 long wooden poles from the front of the cart and wrap them in some of the cloth that he found to make a sort of travois to drag his father into town. When he gets back to his dad, he finds that he has a super high fever from his wounds of like an hour, which is obviously not natural. So Rand is worried that the wound is infected by some evil Trolloc poison or something, and has all the more reason to rush to get his father into town as soon as he can. And that is added on top of the fact that obviously the woods are still flooded with Trollocs looking for him, and so obviously he needs to get out of there. While Rand is dragging Tam all through the night and muffling his groans of pain to avoid being found by the Trollocs, during this time in his feverish delirium, Rand's father says the following: "Battles are always hot, even in the snow. Sweat, heat, blood, heat. Only death is cool. Slope of the mountain. Only place didn't stink of death. Had to get away from the smell of it, sight of it. Heard a baby cry. Their women fight alongside the men, sometimes. But why they wouldn't let her come, I don't. Gave birth there alone, before she died of her wounds. Covered her child with her cloak. But the wind, blown the cloak away. Child, blew with the cold. Should have been dead, too. Crying there. Crying in the snow. I couldn't just leave a child. No children of our own. Always knew you wanted children. I knew you'd take it to your heart, Carrie. Yes, lass, Rand is a good name. A good name." This is obviously distressing to Rand, and he spends the rest of the time dragging his father into town trying to convince himself that it was just his father's fever dream and he is still in fact the son of Tam al'Thor. By the time he finally does arrive in town, he's practically delirious from the effort. But to his dismay, half of the town is on fire. They had been attacked in the night as well. He finds someone to call the Wisdom anyway, but when Nynaeve gets there, she looks at Tam and tells Rand that there is nothing she can do for him. Rand is super distressed at this point and too delirious to give up. He hauls his dad to the inn, owned by the mayor, and gets his and the Greenman who's come for the festivals help to put his father in a bed. And the mayor tells Rand how they were attacked by Trollocs too, and the only reason they came out alive is because the Lady Moiraine turned out to be an Aes Sedai, and the Tall Man Land was her warder, and together they fought off the Trollocs. Right about here, we learn that all of the legends about the Aes Sedai are about how they trick people and curse people and hurt people, and how you can't trust them, and if you vow anything to them, you'll live to regret it. It's really giving witch, or the scary version of a genie. But the mayor tells Rand that if the Wisdom can't help his father, then maybe an Aes Sedai can. And Rand decides it's worth the risk to save his father's life. Moiraine agrees to help Tam, but for a price that will be discussed later. And now that I'm thinking about it, did that line of the story get dropped? Or did it come up and I missed it? Maybe it's coming up in another book. I don't remember that getting resolved. Anyway, between talking with Moiraine Sedai and the mayor, Rand pieces together the Trollocs had attacked 2 farms, Rand's and his friend Matt's. Luckily, Matt's family had all been in town for the festival. And when the Trollocs attacked the town, they started in 2 places, the forge and the blacksmith's house, the 2 places that Perrin goes to the most. Rand ends up telling Moiraine how the 3 of them had seen a rider in black the day before. Moiraine and Lan explain to Rand that Trollocs are often led by Myrrdral, also known as Halfmen, which is a way easier name to remember, so it's what I'll call them more often than not, and that's what the rider in black had been. They're super dangerous, and there had been a bunch of them and hundreds of Trollocs around the night before looking for the 3 boys. Moiraine tells him that the 3 of them are being targeted and that their staying in town would continue to put everyone they love and even the whole Two Rivers region in danger. She asks him to leave with her so she can take him to Tar Valon, which is a huge city where all the Aes Sedai are located, and she says that they'll be safe there, but they'll have to leave tonight. Oh, and she tells him that he can't tell anyone, even his father, but he can leave a note. Rand is super conflicted by this because he's never left the Two Rivers area, nor has he ever wanted to. Also, his father is still unconscious and healing, and he just can't imagine leaving him at all, but especially not without talking to him and making sure that he's doing better first. So Rand ends up laying down on the floor next to his father's bed and waiting for him to wake up. After not sleeping all night as he brought his father into town, however, he ends up falling asleep instantly and having really bad nightmares. There were all these voices telling him to serve them or something, but honestly I don't remember much of it because I was too distracted by these 2 glorious sentences. We've got, he shook his head to try to get it out of his head, and slowly his breathing slowed. So editors call something an echo when the same word appears twice in close proximity in writing like this, but I have just never seen such a perfect and beautiful example as this. It literally just paused and laughed in delight. Like, echoes aren't a good thing, right? You try and avoid them, but these sentences really just tickled my funny bone. After Rand wakes up from his dream, he finds Tam also awake, and he tells him that he has to go with Moiraine to Tar Valon. Tam takes it pretty well, other than wishing that he were strong enough to go with Rand. He gives him good fatherly advice, and then Rand runs off to meet up with Moiraine, Lan, and the others. They all meet up at the inn's stables, all meaning Moiraine, Lan, Rand, Matt, and Perrin. They start divvying up supplies and horses when Egwene walks in. Apparently she overheard their plans and wants to join them. She's always wanted to leave Aemon's Field and have adventures like the heroes in stories. Egwene then threatens Moiraine, saying that if they don't allow her to come along, then she will tell everyone in the town that the Aes Sedai is trying to spirit away their young men, and then the entire town will turn on them and it'll be basically impossible to get away.
Oh, won't somebody please think of the children?
Moiraine is mostly focused on getting the boys out before more Halfmen and Trollocs show up, and so she agrees to let Egwene come along with them, but not before another person pops up and demands to come along. This man is Thom. Remember how he's a 𝕊𝕐𝕒𝕒𝕒, which is basically a bard in a sick, colorful cloak? Other than the fact that he'd been hired for the 𝕊𝕠𝕔𝕒 festival and was there when Rand was trying to figure out what to do with his father and talking to the mayor, we don't know that much about him. Thom basically tells Moiraine and Lan that he will be coming along with them, and with that they saddle up and leave. But before we dive into their whole journey, there are a couple of things that I wanted to touch on. In chapter 2 we get this great line, "Men wear many faces but always the same man," and it gave me chills. I'm really excited at the prospect of reincarnation in a series. It's just such a fascinating concept with so much potential in fantasy, and so I always love to see how people use reincarnation in books. Next, when we learn about the Aes Sedai, we learn that women can wield the female half of the one power, called saidar. Men could once wield the male half, called saidin, but the Dark One corrupted the saidin so that the men who wield it often go crazy and end up not alive, and sometimes turn evil along the way. Plus, maybe the Aes Sedai, the women magic users, are hunting them down and locking them up or unaliving them? Unclear. So basically we learn that only women can wield magic in this world, but there's also this thing called the Dragon Reborn. The Dragon Reborn is this guy that has apparently been fighting the Dark One for ages, and maybe sometimes is also a pawn of the Dark One. And it's basically common knowledge that the coming of the Dragon Reborn is really bad news because he's definitely going to be evil. It's all a little unclear, but the main thing that is clear is that it's going to be Rand, and hopefully he'll be good, and it's being set up as a hero's journey, so basically he's going to be the chosen one. Okay, you with me? Good, because my main thought at this point was, no, not another book where only women can use magic except for the chosen one and he's always a man. Because that was always the lamest part of Dune. The fact that Frank Herbert wrote this incredibly fascinating female-only magic system in the Bene Gesserit, but then he had the chosen one be male, which felt like such a letdown. I love when people write interesting new gender norms and make fascinating magic systems with unexpected rules. But it seems like each time someone specifically writes a magic system for and around women, they still have to be saved by a man. So I'll let you know how my feelings on this magic system develop throughout this series, but it's safe to say that I was a little bit disappointed at this point. To be clear, I am not saying that this series is derivative of Dune. I'm just saying that this is a similarity that I noticed across the two books that both disappointed me. Okay, last thought before we dive into the journey, and it comes during the first time that Egwene is telling Rand that she wants adventure in the Great Wide Somewhere.
I want adventure in the Great Wide Somewhere.
We get this description, arms crossed beneath her breasts. And I would like to pose a counter question. Where else would they be crossed? 'Cause it ain't up here. That's how it works. I'm not necessarily saying that it was written this way because male authors think about women's breasts too much. But the shoe might be suspiciously close to the right size. Alright, and on to the journey, and a quick shout out to Dragonmount for helping me keep the order of the events straight. That was very helpful to use their reference. The group sets out on horseback and have some adventures on the way to their first town, Baerlon. They cross a river, and then Moiraine sinks the ferry behind them with magic, and this is supposed to slow the Trollocs since apparently they hate water. She also covers them with fog from time to time, and uses her magic to make the horses able to go further faster without tiring, and help the travelers feel rested as well. She also notably starts talking to Egwene about the One Power and the Aes Sedai, and tells her that she has potential to start using the One Power and become an Aes Sedai. Egwene is super excited about this, but the boys, and especially Rand, are less so, because they still don't really trust Aes Sedai, even though they have quite literally entrusted their lives with one. Oh, and Lan starts training Rand with a sword and Perrin with a battle axe that he brought along because they just so happened to have one in the blacksmith shop. Mat gets no training. Poor boy. He gets overlooked a lot in this book. But at least he already knows how to use a bow. Perfectly, apparently. Once in Baerlon, they meet a woman named Min, who can see the future, or parts of it, apparently, and she tells Rand that he and Egwene aren't endgame, unfortunately. Well, she sees that they'll be in different parts of the pattern, which is how they describe these things. A common phrase in this book about fate and future and stuff is the wheel weaves as the wheel wills, which first off just sounds super cool, and second off tells us that the Wheel of Time is not like a tire or a disc or a ring. When Robert Jordan is using the term Wheel of Time, he's talking about a spinning wheel, which changes my whole mental image of like the whole series. But it makes all the imagery around a pattern make so much more sense because they view time and destiny and all that existential stuff as weaving a cloth, which is just a lovely image. I love that world building. That night, Rand has this super creepy dream about this evil guy who has flames for eyes and calls himself Beelzebub. I mean, 𝕀𝕐𝕂. I have a picture of him here. It's actually not of the right guy, so don't come after me. I realized too late to reprint. 𝕀𝕐𝕂 keeps asking Rand if he's the one and tells him that it's his destiny to serve him. Rand screams out that it's a dream and he can't hurt him, and 𝕀𝕐𝕂 brings out a rat and breaks all its bones with his mind, and Rand wakes up with a start only to find a rat unalived in the exact same position that he saw in his dream. Rand overhears the maids talking about finding a bunch of rats in that position, and then he discusses it with Mat and Perrin, and they both had the exact same dream as well. And around here they also piece together that 𝕀𝕐𝕂 is another name for the Dark One. Okay, and honestly, this was the most horrifying part of the book for me, because I personally have a lot of freaky dreams, and I can also lucid dream a little bit. So usually by the time I realize it's a dream, I can shift the dream. So to have Rand recognize it as a dream and then try to shift it, and not only have it not work, but have the dream somehow be kind of real too? Nope. Dude, and the dreams get so much worse too, because later they become like chasing dreams and mazes and trying to get somewhere and not getting any closer. And oh man, Robert Jordan is a master at writing the most unnerving dreams possible. It freaked me out so much, and it's still unnerving to think about right now. 10 out of 10. Also in Baerlon, we are introduced to the Children of the Light. They are this insane group of people that maybe are an official group and have like legal abilities, or maybe they're just religious zealots and act like the police. That was not clear to me. Anyway, they think literally anyone who looks at them funny is a dark friend, which is a term for someone in this book who works for the Dark One and basically sold their soul to the devil. Anyway, later that same day, who shows up at the inn but Nynaeve, the town wisdom. She says that she came after them because right after they left, there was a town meeting with everyone freaking out that their boys were running away with an Aes Sedai, and they were fighting about who should go off and get them. And apparently Rand's dad was one of the first people to volunteer to go back and get them. But Nynaeve says that she would be the best at tracking, finding them, and keeping them safe, and feels a responsibility over them as the town wisdom. So she left after them before anyone else could. Now, I'm not surprised at all that the village would be worried about 3 boys being targeted by Trollocs and then immediately running away with an Aes Sedai. Okay, but here's the thing. Rand actually got to explain to his father why he was leaving, rather than just leaving a note. And his father agreed that it was the right course of action and only wished that he could go with him. But he couldn't because he was still healing from almost dying, right? So why did the wisdom say that Rand's dad was one of the first people volunteering to go and get the boys and bring them back, even though he could barely walk and already agreed that it was the right course of action? It doesn't add up to me, but that's a minor detail. So well. Oh, and I think that Min, the girl who could see a little bit of the future, said that Nynaeve is part of the pattern too. So that's fun, because that means Nynaeve will be joining the party, which is great because she ended up being like my favorite character in the whole book. Oh my gosh, then a Myrrdral, the Halfmen, remember them? One of them just appears in the kitchen of the inn where Rand is. Oh, and they have no eyes apparently, so that's fun. It's really creepy. I guess they don't need them. Lan then fights off the Halfmen and scares him away enough to get the entire group out of the inn, and they all run away into the night, including Nynaeve. Nynaeve basically says that she's not leaving without Egwene and the boys, and she's starting to understand that they really do need to go to Tar Valon, so that means deciding to go with them to keep them safe and then bring them back when eventually they're done with whatever they do there. Next we get to Shadar Logoth. The party is following the Caemlyn road and they get driven off of it by Trollocs, and they're really starting to get surrounded at this point, so they try to take a shortcut and come across this deserted old city that Moiraine calls Shadar Logoth. Moiraine decides that it's the best course of action to go in for the night since it's such a creepy city that the Trollocs will not go inside, so they'll be safe for the night. Now, I don't particularly remember if she forgets to tell them that the Trollocs won't come into Shadar Logoth because it's far more evil than Trollocs, or if the boys ignore her, or what. But the very first thing they do when they get inside the city is sneak away from the group to go explore the decrepit city. Not only do they wander around alone, the 3 boys, for like an hour or 2, but they also meet a person, yes, a person in an abandoned city, and not only think nothing of it, but follow him deep into the depths of one of the buildings because he said he found treasure and will let them have some if they help him haul it off. Boys, you know what I mean? They only ever think about one thing. And it's treasure. There is treasure, but the guys get the heebie-jeebies after following this guy all the way down into the basement of the building, so Rand and Perrin tell Mat that they don't think they should touch any of it. And then the guy, sure enough, attacks them. Luckily, they book it out of there and make it out alive, and rejoin the group. They get chastised by Moiraine, and, well, everyone, but Moiraine is especially worried that they took something or did the guy a favor or something, but luckily they did not. And then suddenly they hear Trollocs' horns. They're inside the city. So much for a good night's sleep. They hop on their horses to get out of the city, but night has fallen during all of their adventures, which is bad news in the city. There are creepy eyes following them from the windows of every building, and then the streets in front of them start to fill with a thick fog, and Moiraine freaks out and makes them go another way. Now why, you might ask? Well, we see why in a few moments later when there are Trollocs coming towards them from the other end of the street, and the fog stretches out and touches them, and they get unalived in screaming, horrific ways.
Oh, what a world! What a world!
Fun, right? They keep going and it looks like they're going to make it out, but then the fog separates them and the group splits up. Spoiler, this happens on page 307 and the gang doesn't reunite until page 601 out of 777 pages, which was a little frustrating to me, but that's how books with big parties go sometimes. In the end, they all make it out of the city and are aiming to cross the river to reunite, but with a backup plan that they can head to Whitebridge or Caemlyn or Tar Valon and meet up when they can, because Moiraine says she'll be able to find them, so they should head in that direction. The groups that they come out in are Rand, Mat, and Thom, Perrin and Egwene, and Moiraine, Lan, and Nynaeve. Of these groups, I found Rand, Mat, and Thom's group to be the least interesting, so let's start with that one. Rand, Mat, and Thom get to the river with Trollocs tied on their tails. They hop onto a boat and cast ashore, luckily before the Trollocs join them on the boat. The captain of the ship agrees to take them to Whitebridge because unfortunately they're already far enough downriver that they cannot cross and rejoin their friends. They do then get to Whitebridge and run into a Halfman in the middle of the city and are basically about to die when Thom tells them to run and throws himself at the Halfman. Mat and Rand begin to run and over their shoulders watch Thom basically die. Super traumatic stuff, but they keep running because they need to get to Caemlyn, and so they head down the Caemlyn road by themselves. They often sleep on haystacks or by the side of the road at night, but eventually start doing work for farmers for a place to sleep and some food. However, while they'd been on the boat to Whitebridge, they'd been pretending to be Thom's gleeman apprentices, and so Rand learned to play the flute and Mat learned to juggle. They eventually start to use these skills to get free room and board at various inns as well. They get cornered by dark friends a couple of times on their journey, but one time it's really bad. They get cornered in this really crappy storeroom that the innkeeper had given them to sleep in after performing, but there's no exit in the room, and the dark friends are forcing their way into the room.
Here's Johnny!
And basically calls down lightning from the sky that blasts the inn apart, unalives the men, and allows them to escape. They book it, but unfortunately Rand gets violently ill as a side effect of using the one power for the first time, but we'll get to that later. Also, Mat has been made temporarily totally blind by the lightning flashing directly in his face, so that complicates things. As his eyes start to get better, they become more sensitive to light, but luckily prior to this they've been given scarves that Mat can use to cover his eyes. But they were given scarves twice by two men saying basically the same lines. Check this out. On page 449, it's mentioned that an unnamed farmer had given them scarves. Let me read this passage to you. A farmer had given it to him, a long-faced man with grooves in his cheeks from worry. "I don't know what you're running from," he said with an anxious frown, "and I don't want to. You understand? My family." Abruptly, the farmer had dug two long scarves out of his coat pocket and pushed the tangle of wool at them. "It's not much, but here, belong to my boys. They have others. You don't know me, understand? It's hard times." But then, on page 484, they're getting a ride from a farmer named 𝕬𝕚𝕒𝕚, and we get this passage. He hardly looked at Rand or Mat, but when he let them down by the narrow rail-lined track that led off his farm, he hesitated, then said, almost as if to himself, "I don't know what you're running from, and I don't want to. I have a wife and children, you understand? My family. It's hard times for helping strangers. If I was a good man," Mole said, "I'd offer a couple lads soaked to the skin a place to dry out and get warm in front of my fire. But it's hard times, and strangers, I don't know what you're running from, and I don't want to. You understand? My family." Suddenly he pulled two long wooden scarves, dark and thick, out of his coat pocket. "It's not much, but here, belong to my boys. They have others. You don't know me, understand? It's hard times." It's the exact same dialogue. Like, there's little differences, but how did it end up in there twice? That's not the only time this happens either. In like the same passage with Rand and Mat, it happens again. Mat and Rand are catching rides with farmers, right? And they catch a ride from a farmer named 𝕬𝕚𝕒𝕚 twice in a row, but both times are introduced as the first time they meet this man. Okay, so page 477 at the beginning of chapter 33, we get, "Some people waved or called greetings to 𝕬𝕚𝕚𝕚, the farmer whose cart it was. Master Kinch, leathery faced and taciturn, shouted back a few words each time around the pipe in his teeth." Okay. 𝕬𝕚𝕚𝕚. Then on page 499 at the very end of the same chapter, we get, "Holding Rand upright, Mat waited impatiently for a horse cart approaching from the village to pass them. Mat gave a grunt of surprise when the cart slowed to stop before them. A leathery-faced man looked down from the driver's seat. After a bit of discourse about why they're there, the farmer then says, 'Well, climb up then, your friend in the back. If he's sick again, it's best it's on the straw, not up here. Name's 𝕬𝕚𝕚𝕚𝕚.'" While I was reading this book, I was going back and forth between the physical book and the audiobook, and so I thought that I'd just like skipped around by mistake. But no, these two separate encounters are both doubled. It's wild. I had to go back and look it up, and I really don't know how that happened, and it's kind of amazing to me in a weird way. Okay, the other main thing to note about Mat and Rand's journey is that Mat is slowly devolving into paranoid madness, but not just regular madness, like Gollum madness. Precious! Turns out he took something from the treasure at Shadar Logoth after all. It's a dagger with a ruby in the hilt, and he holds it obsessively and freaks out anytime Rand suggests selling it for, like, you know, food or something. He also gets more and more suspicious of even the people that are helping them. and starts muttering to himself all the time. It certainly is an interesting development, but since their timeline is just the two of them walking for ages, and Mat gets less and less sociable as time goes on, it gets a little frustrating. For that reason, and also for the reason that because of it, Mat kind of gets the Will from Stranger Things treatment.
Why am I tied up? 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 Will, why am I tied up?
He spends the majority of the book possessed or out of his mind or whatever it is that he is, and so we don't get to know him as a character very well at all, which is a shame. Okay, let's jump parties for a minute and follow Perrin and Egwene. Their story is super fun. So they both swim across the river to get away from the Trollocs, right? Trollocs won't cross water, so on the other side they're basically safe. But they do get separated in the river, and Perrin thinks Egwene has not survived. He also lost his horse in the river somewhere, and so when he gets to the other side, he sleeps in his wet clothes and is overall a sad boy. The next morning, however, he walks like 20 feet into the trees and finds Egwene perfectly fine and dry with her horse and bedroll cooking food over a warm fire. A fire that she apparently lit using the One Power because Moiraine has been teaching her how to use it. Perrin is somewhat uneasy by this fact, but Egwene helps him dry off his clothes, feeds him, and they head off together. Since from the other side of the river, they're not exactly sure where the Caemlyn road is, but they do know which direction Caemlyn is in, they decide to head off in that direction through the wilderness. Now, I gave you a little bit of a description about Perrin in the beginning because I'm good like that, but as a reader, you actually don't get any characterization of Perrin until 40% of the way into this book, or right about here. At this point, we're in his POV and we learn that he's large for his age, slow and careful, thinks through things thoroughly, and everyone acts surprised when he says things like, "I think," which is super rude. Anyway, it feels like a big gap in the book because at this point, even though it's been in Rand's point of view all the way up until here, we get characterization for everyone but Perrin. So when we finally do learn something about him at about halfway through the book, it's kind of surprising. Anyway, as they go along, they find a man camping nearby named Elias, who they find out is actually a wolf brother. Wolf brothers are a far more ancient kind of magic, or mystical stuff, where certain humans can speak and be spoken to by wolves. Not only does Elias bring his wolf friends out to prove this, but he does this because he says Perrin is a wolf brother too, and he's trying to convince him. They do end up traveling with Elias and the wolves, but Perrin is super uncomfortable with all of this wolf brother stuff, and denies his being one for a very long time, even after he starts to kind of detect the wolf's thoughts. While traveling with Elias toward Caemlyn, they meet up with a group of tinkers. Tinkers are a group of nomadic people who travel along selling their crafts and homemade items, but are generally not well liked by other groups of people. People have these ideas about them that they're thieves or otherwise untrustworthy, but Perrin and Egwene are quickly able to unlearn these prejudices. The tinkers decide to travel toward Caemlyn with them for a while and teach Perrin and Egwene the way of the leaf, which basically just means to do no harm to people, and I think also maybe animals, I don't remember. In the end, the way of the leaf doesn't sit very well with Perrin because they discuss how, even theoretically, if someone were unaliving your family, you shouldn't raise a weapon against them because nonviolence is the answer. And in the end, they part ways with the tinkers. Along the way, Egwene starts to notice that Perrin's eyes are slowly turning yellow and wolf-like like Elias's. And Perrin also learns that his mental bond with these wolves is actually what's keeping the scary 𝕀𝕐𝕂 dreams away. And then as they travel, they start to notice ravens. And Moiraine had previously taught them that rats and ravens and creatures of that sort all work for the Dark One as his spies. So they try to stay out of sight of these ravens, but they start running into flocks and flocks of these ravens and watch them pick any living creature clean down to the bone. And let me tell you, stakes are high. The wolves are scouting for them and tell them that there's a huge flock of ravens behind them that they gotta stay ahead of so they don't get spotted. But there are ravens ahead of them headed that way that they can't catch up to or they'll get spotted and probably unalived. They get to a steading, which is apparently a place where the One Power can't touch, and so the Dark One's creatures fear to go. But it just looks like everywhere else except for with more flowers. So they camp there, but in the middle of the night, the wolves report that riders just entered the steading. And so they scramble to hide, and Elias and the wolves are fighting off the riders, and Perrin is getting this mental play-by-play from the wolves. So he tells Egwene what is happening as it's happening, and then they do get found by the riders, and a wolf loses its life trying to stop them from getting captured. And Perrin feels the feelings that this wolf feels as it's getting unalived, and so he kind of blacks out and tries to fight off the riders. I think he ends up unaliving one of them as well, and then the scene cuts. Perrin wakes up and finds that he is tied to a bed with so many ropes. He is very, very tied down. And Egwene is next to him, and she is also tied up. And who have they been caught by? None other than the Children of the Light. So rip, because Perrin unalived at least one, if not two of them, and so no matter what they say about not being dark friends, they are definitely going to be taken captive all the way to wherever the Children of Light headquarters are and probably get unalived themselves. Before we get to that though, let's jump over to Moiraine, Lan, and Nynaeve's timeline. After escaping Shadar Logoth, Nynaeve thinks that she's alone, but she ends up tracking Lan and Moiraine and catching up to them and joining with them. Once together, Moiraine attempts to locate the boys, and to Nynaeve's chagrin, she discovers that Moiraine actually only has a way to track the three boys and not Egwene at all. Remember those silver coins Moiraine gave each of the boys back in the Two Rivers? As long as they each possess their coin, Moiraine actually has a connection to them across distances and can tell vaguely where they are. She can track them through the one power over short distances, but for long distances, she needs an anchor like the coin. Moiraine says she can tell that there are two boys headed downriver toward Whitebridge, which is Rand and Mat with Thom. So they start to follow them, but Mat and Rand actually end up using the coins to pay the captain of the boat, and so she loses track of them. Nynaeve is terrified that this is because something happened to them, but Moiraine insists that they have to be alive because she needs them to be. And she will find them again, but they first have to go after the boy who still has his coin, which is Perrin, who's traveling cross-country with Egwene and Elias. We get this section through Nynaeve's point of view, which is a big part of why I like this group so much. Nynaeve is one of my favorite characters in this book. She's funny and spunky and confident. I love how competitive she gets too. All through this section, she's trying to prove that she's a better tracker than Lan. At one point, they need to split up, and she has to take the horses in a different direction from them, and she tries really hard to do it in a way that Lan can't find them. It's so funny. Eventually, the playful competition between them becomes mutual, but it's still subtle and below the surface, and it's so fun to read. On the other hand, Nynaeve is beefing with Moiraine. She's really upset with her for taking away the Two Rivers folks and putting them in danger, but more than that, she's upset with her for teaching Egwene the Aes Sedai stuff. Moiraine explains to her that she's been teaching Egwene because Egwene has such raw potential, and finally explains to Nynaeve that she's actually probably been using the One Power all along herself as well. Moiraine says she can sense her raw power, and Nynaeve is one of those wisdoms that can actually do things like predict things and make healing tonics that do more than just the raw herbs inside of them. After questioning Nynaeve on this topic, she finally pulls out of her that when Egwene was young, she was suffering with an extreme illness and probably not going to make it, but Nynaeve really cared for her and waited by her bedside and stubbornly insisted that she was going to survive, and ultimately she did, but Nynaeve fell ill afterward. Nynaeve had always thought that it had been a bit of a coincidence and Egwene got better on her own, but as it turned out, it really was Nynaeve's sheer force of will that kept Egwene alive. Moiraine further explains that typically, without guidance, the first few times that a woman uses the One Power, they fall extremely ill and often don't survive. That's why Moiraine wanted to guide Egwene so that she could do it safely. Now, remember that time that Mat and Rand were trapped, and Rand might have accidentally wished lightning to come down and save them, and then became deathly ill afterwards? Sound familiar? Anyway, Nynaeve and co eventually catch up to Egwene and Perrin after they've been captured by the Children of the Light for a couple of days, and they stage a rescue. The wolves see them coming and get the message to Perrin to get ready, and Nynaeve goes off to cut all of their horses free in the middle of the night, right before Moiraine sets off massive bolts of lightning, setting the entire camp into chaos, and the horses run for the hills. During this chaos, Lan sneaks in and finds Perrin and Egwene and leads them to where Moiraine and Nynaeve are. Then they all head toward Caemlyn, hoping to find Mat and Rand there waiting for them. Meanwhile, Mat and Rand do get to Caemlyn first and find themselves in a mass of people that are wearing accents of white and red, clearly as a way to delineate themselves from each other, taking sides on some issue. During their journey there, enough regular people and Dark Friends alike recognize the heron on Rand's sword, and the Dark Friends ended up on the lookout for it. So Rand decides that he needs to wrap the hilt so that no Dark Friend can see the mark and recognize him for it. He goes up to a stand on the side of the street and sees that they're selling the red and white cloths, and red happens to be cheaper, so he buys that one, wraps it around his hilt, and they go on their merry way. They meet up with a friend of Thom's that Thom had told them to go to, who owned an inn in Caemlyn. And this innkeeper, by the way, tells them that there's absolutely no way Thom died that easily, so he thinks he's still alive. So that's fun. The innkeeper sees that Rand is wearing the red, which tells him that Rand is a good queen's man, and he tells him so. And because of that, because the innkeeper is also a good queen's man, he trusts them all the more. The queen of the country is tied to the Aes Sedai, and so that is why some of the people aren't on the queen's side here, because they're suspicious of the Aes Sedai. And the people wearing the white are supportive of the Children of the Light. And unfortunately, more people in Caemlyn are wearing the white to show that they are in favor of these zealots who go around calling everyone Dark Friends, rather than the actual queen of their country. Okay, fun. The way that they react to the phrase dark friend in this society is giving Red Scare to the nth degree. Like, I have no idea how society can even function this way. They're drawing like dragon scales or teeth or something on each other's doors to mark them as dark friends, and it's just absolute chaos at all times. Luckily, Thom's friend, the innkeeper, does give them a nice place to stay in the inn, so they don't have to be down in the streets where they could be recognized by a dark friend. So they decide to hole up in the inn and hope that their friends find them and come and meet them. And at this point, Matt is basically catatonic in his bed, clutching the dagger. Rand gets bored in the room with creepy Matt for obvious reasons, so he decides to go down to the library where he meets Loial the Ogier. Ogiers are an ancient species believed by many to be a creature of myth, since they themselves built many of the very ancient cities in this world. They live a long, long time and look after trees and are very slow and methodical when coming to decisions. Also, they look like this. Rand becomes friends with Loial, that's Loial with an I, not a Y, and he tells him about everything that has happened up to that point. And Loial, who has left his steading, the place where Ogiers live, to see the world as a young, 90-year-old brash Ogier, asks to come along with Rand moving forward, and I practically cheered for joy. Loial is already such a fun character, and I really wanted him to join the party, so I was very excited. But Rand is still waiting for his friends, and thus still bored, so he decides to go out and see the false dragon. Oh my gosh, I haven't even explained the false dragon, have I? Okay, remember what I said about the dragon reborn? How it's this guy that's been doing battle with the Dark One on and off all throughout time, and like sometimes he's on the Dark One's side maybe, and everyone thinks that his coming is going to bring about the end of the world. Remember that? So every so often a guy comes along that claims to be the dragon reborn. Sometimes they're men who can use the Sidene, and sometimes they're not. And they gain all these followers, and the Aes Sedai go and stop them and prove that they are a false dragon. So at about the time that the book starts, there's this guy named Logain who's claiming to be the dragon reborn, but he's just been captured by the Aes Sedai. And they're bringing him through Caemlyn so that the queen can take him herself to Tar Valon to be dealt with by the Aes Sedai. So that's why Caemlyn is so crowded, because everyone's trying to get a glimpse of this false dragon, and there's all this turmoil about whether the Aes Sedai or the White Cloaks, aka the Children of the Light, are the good people, so there's all this chaos. So Rand decides he wants to see this Logain guy as well. So he climbs a hill far away from the crowd, but close enough that he can see as he gets brought through, and he sits on this wall, and then hears a girl's voice and it startles him, so he falls backwards into this garden where the girl is. And wouldn't you know it, but he fell into the queen's own garden and finds himself face to face with the crown princess, Elaine, and her brother Gawain? Chaos. He almost gets killed by the guards and then gets brought before the queen, and Elaine tells her mom not to kill him because it was an honest mistake, maybe don't imprison him either, and somehow he ends up getting off. But maybe mainly because the queen and the crown princess Elaine need to be off to Tar Valon to deal with this Logain guy, so they've got bigger fish to fry. By the time Rand finally gets back to the inn, he finally meets up with the rest of the crew. They all briefly explain what happened to all of them, and Moiraine freaks out when she finds out about Matt. She goes up to try and heal him, and eventually they do both come back down into the library, and Matt is acting like his old self again, but with massive gaps in his memory over the last few weeks, and he's still clutching something under his cloak. Unfortunately, Moiraine couldn't take the dagger away from him without unaliving him because it had taken such a hold on his soul, I think, and at this point she could barely save him at all. She's just slowing the possession until she can get him to Tar Valon, where the rest of the Aes Sedai can help him. But the boys finally tell Moiraine about their dreams about Ba'alzamon, and they mention that in Rand's most recent dream, Ba'alzamon had said that he was going to use the Eye of the World, so there was nothing that could stop him. When Moiraine hears this, she knows that they have to change course. They can't go to Tar Valon, they have to go defend the Eye of the World. Now, the Eye of the World apparently moves around, but it's always with the Green Man in the Blight. We'll get to the Green Man, and no, he isn't the Jolly Green Giant. Luckily, they've already decided that Loial can come with them. Yay! And Loial, being an Ogier, can help them take shortcuts using something called the Ways. Now, Loial thinks this is a terrible idea, because apparently the Ways were created by male Aes Sedai back in the day. So when the Sidene was corrupted by the Dark One, so were the Ways. So now when people use them, they often come out mad and rambling about a black wind that may or may not eat people's souls. But for the sake of the entire world, Moiraine manages to convince Loial to take them through the Ways. Once inside the Ways, a thick darkness clouds around them and they have to huddle close and travel fast. They discover that due to the corruption, several of the bridges have collapsed and they have to reroute several times. As they near their destination, they hear the black wind coming and have to make an absolute break for it. Luckily, they make it out in time and head to the city that they exited nearby, called Fal Dara. While there, among other things, they learn that Lan was once the crown prince of a country that fell into the Blight. They leave Fal Dara and head into the Blight, and during one of their overnight campings, Rand overhears Nynaeve and Lan talking. Okay, I'm gonna read you this section and then I'll tell you what I like about it and what I don't. The Wisdom looked at Lan silently for a long time, then poured a cup of tea and brought it to him. When he reached out with a murmur of thanks, she did not let go right away. I should have known that you would be a king, she said quietly. Her eyes were steady on the warder's face, but her voice trembled trembled slightly. Lan looked back at her just as intently. It seemed to Rand that the warder's face actually softened. I'm not a king, Nynaeve. Just a man without as much to his name as even the meanest farmer's croft. Nynaeve's voice steadied. Some women don't ask for land or gold. Just the man, and the man who would ask her to accept so little would not be worthy of her. You are a remarkable woman, as beautiful as the sunrise, as fierce as a warrior. You are a lioness, Wisdom. A wisdom seldom weds. She paused to take a deep breath, as if steadying herself. But if I go to Tar Valon, it may be that I will be something other than a wisdom. Aes Sedai marry as seldom as wisdoms. Few men can live with so much power in a wife, dimming them by her radiance, whether she wishes it or not. Some men are strong enough. I know one such. If there could have been any doubt, her look left none as to whom she meant. All I have is a sword, and a war I cannot win, but can never stop fighting. I told you I care nothing for that. Light, you made me say more than is proper already. Will you shame me to the point of asking you? I will never shame you. The gentle tone, like a caress, sounded odd to Rand's ears in the warder's voice, but it made Nynaeve's eyes brighten. I will hate the man you choose because he is not me, and love him if he makes you smile. No woman deserves the sure knowledge of a widow's black as her bride's piece. You least of all. He set the untouched cup on the ground and rose. I must check the horses. Nynaeve remained there, kneeling after he had gone. Okay, so this is everything. Exactly what I thought was happening with all the competitiveness and banter between Nynaeve and Lan, and I love cute romances in fantasy novels. And this conversation was just so lovely. But did we have to get it from Rand's perspective? Ever since they grouped back up, we've only ever gotten Rand's perspective, which after being used to some of the others' thoughts, it's kind of weird. But it was definitely the weirdest right here. Like, this is such a huge moment, but we didn't really build to it. We were just getting hints of their attraction before they regrouped, and since we've been seeing from Rand's eyes ever since, we didn't really get much more. This scene literally jumps out of nowhere. It feels like we just threw this conversation in there to get somewhere with them, but wasted the chance to see this romance progress, even if it didn't go anywhere. And in that way, it really took away from the weight of the moment. And so I really hope that more happens between them in later books. Or I'll cry. Okay, let's talk about the blight. Something I haven't mentioned yet is that throughout this entire book, it's been a really harsh winter, and it's meant to be spring by now, but spring hasn't really come. Everyone is panicking about whether they'll even be able to plant crops in time to have food for the next year, and there's even further panic wondering if this winter is somehow going to be eternal. While in the blight, it's actually super hot for some reason, and the plants are all very sickly and dying, and also reach out to catch living things, and presumably eat them. Moiraine keeps them at bay at first, but eventually Lan and the armed boys have to start fighting off these plants, and eventually weird creepy beasts as well. They do get close to where Moiraine had found the Green Man before, but apparently nobody ever finds the Green Man twice. That's like his shtick, and so since Moiraine has found the Green Man before, everyone's really worried that this isn't even gonna work. But Moiraine says that in times of great need, there's a chance that you'll be able to find him twice, and no one has ever had a greater need than them. And then just like that, they stumble into this lush, beautiful green area filled with flowers and plants and trees. And out steps the Green Man. This image is technically the Green Man from Celtic mythology, but I'm pretty sure that's exactly what this character is meant to be, so voila. He's like a forest god of some kind, and he didn't used to be the only one, but he ended up being tasked with guarding the eye, which wasn't his original purpose, and so somehow he wound up being like the only one of his kind left. He leads them to the Eye of the World, and it's this entrance to a small cave, and there's water down there, and so it gives you the idea that the power is in the water, or the power is the water, and they're all careful not to touch the water, and so again you get the idea that touching the water is going to be how you use the power in some way. And it's super unclear to all of them what they're doing there, and so they walk back out of the Eye of the World and chill nearby. And then we get the final fight. While they're chilling there, two men walk up and introduce themselves as Aginor and 𝕊𝕐𝕂. I only have a picture of Aginor. They're two of the Forsaken who are bound with the Dark One at the breaking of the world. They straight up explain to them that they aren't bound anymore because the seal weakens and they were on the outside of the wheel, and so they got freed. The mental image that this gave me was that the Dark One and all of his goons were frozen in this big ball of ice with the Dark One at the center, and so as the ball of ice started to melt, some of them on the outside got free. I have no idea how accurate that is, but it's a hilarious mental image that popped into my mind, and so I decided to share it with you. Lan charges 𝕊𝕐𝕂 and gets thrown like a doll, and Nynaeve screams and attacks him and gets grabbed out of the air, and then everyone starts moving. Rand tries to stop Egwene from going to help Nynaeve, and Mat and Perrin get thrown to the ground, and then the Green Man steps into the chaos. He grabs 𝕊𝕐𝕂 and lifts him into the air, and Bathomel starts sprouting shrooms out of every part of his body. And he grabs the Green Man's head, and there's all this smoke coming up. And in the end, the Forsaken is a pile of mushrooms on the ground, and where the Green Man fell, a great oak tree sprouted. The remaining Forsaken, Aginor, is stunned by this, but then turns to fight, and Moiraine tells everyone to run while she faces off with him. Rand watches her lift off the ground as he turns to run. As he does, though, he sees Egwene trying to use the one power against Aginor to help Moiraine, and Rand pushes her to try and kickstart her running, and she does start to run away, but Aginor has focused in on her instead of Moiraine. Rand panics and throws a rock at him, trying to get his focus off of Egwene, and Aginor turns towards him instead. Rand takes off running, and as he does, he hears Moiraine start to scream. And let me tell you, Moiraine being super subdued and stoic all throughout the book, even as she's calling lightning down from the sky, really pays off here, because the emotional weight of her screaming really hits you. It shows how high the stakes are and how strong Aginor is if he can make her scream in agony. Rand keeps running, and eventually Aginor catches up to him right as Rand finds himself at the edge of a cliff. As Aginor approaches, Rand feels more than sees a cord of light attached to Aginor, presumably power he's pulling from the eye. As Rand focuses on it, a rope of it breaks off and connects to Rand. Aginor screams that he won't share the power with Rand, and somehow they're fighting, maybe seeing who can pull on the power of the eye faster. Very unclear, but Aginor ends up lighting on fire and is unalived. Rand is so overcome with the amount of light that he's pulling in that he can't see for a minute. Then he finds himself in the mountains near a battle between the Trollocs and the humans near 𝕊𝕐𝕐 that the humans are definitely going to lose. Without even meaning to, he calls down bolt after bolt of lightning on the Trollocs and overturns the ground underneath them. He ends up destroying the majority of their army, giving the humans the upper hand. And this whole time that he's been calling on the power of the eye, he's been screaming, "No!" and "Away! Please, no!"
No! God, please, no! No!
Which makes it sound like he doesn't want to be drawing on the power. He doesn't want to be the chosen one. But right around here, he starts screaming, "This has to end, 𝕊𝕐𝕐𝕂. It has to be ended." And he's guided by the light to a staircase suspended in the air, and he climbs and climbs and climbs. And it's super unclear if this is physical or mental or magical or a vision, and by about this point, I'm getting pretty lost. He gets to the top and enters a chamber where all of his dreams with 𝕊𝕐𝕂 took place. He enters and sees the Dark One, and that there's a black cord of darkness leading to him, just as there's a cord of light leading to Rand. 𝕊𝕐𝕂 tells him that he will either bend his knee willingly to his master or be driven down into the dirt and made to serve him. Rand says that there's always another way, but the Dark One says that he will serve him living or dead, and shows Rand his mother's soul being tortured. Seeing this, Rand summons the light in the form of a sword and stabs the things torturing his mother's soul, and they burst into light. Rand then turns on 𝕊𝕐𝕂 and cuts the cord of darkness connected to him, and 𝕊𝕐𝕂 screams out he shouldn't be able to channel the light in this way without being trained. Rand stabs him in the chest, and the Dark One goes up in pure white flames, and Rand thinks it's over before passing out. Which was a really confusing fight scene to read. I had to read it several times to figure out what was happening, and it's kind of, I don't know, it feels kind of out of nowhere that Rand all of a sudden knows how to fight off the literal Dark One, which is kind of like a god. Obviously, he didn't totally kill him, or there wouldn't be 13 more books in the series, but it still felt a little cheap. Don't hate me for saying that. It was built up throughout the entire book that there was basically no way to escape him. And if you agreed to anything, then he would have a hold on your soul. And he corrupted half the power of the world. And any man who uses that power falls under his control. And just all of that. And then all of a sudden Rand is connected to the eye and can just defeat him? It was also confusing to me that they spent all of this time getting to a specific location to use or protect the eye, and then ultimately Rand is able to use it from a remote location. It didn't make sense that they spent all that effort getting to a specific location just to be able to use it in other locations. Maybe he was just mentally in other places? Unclear. But even still, Moiraine tries to stop Aginor from going down to the eye, but then he ends up drawing on it without ever going down to the eye of the world at all. This book is a very physical fantasy book with loads of sword fighting and getting tied up and hiding and walking long distances, and everything was very real and grounded in the physical. So it felt very confusing and a little out of place to have the final fight be so ephemeral and mental and done in such a way that it's hard to tell if it really actually happened, or if anything happened, or what happened if something did, and exactly how it happened. It just felt out of sync with the rest of the book to me. Back to the story, Rand wakes up and makes his way back to the Eye of the World, where he sees Moiraine, Egwene, and Nynaeve, and tells them what happened. Out of the others, Lan is the only one that learns what Rand did, and Moiraine tells everyone that what they came to do is done, and they can go back to their lives as the wheel wills. This part did seem a little bit odd to me, because Moiraine was also so set this entire time on bringing all of them to Tar Valon, to the Aes Sedai. Even if from this point forward she knows that Rand is the only one that she needs to keep an eye on because he is potentially the dragon reborn. I was surprised to see her let any of them go, but especially Rand. My idea here is that it's possible that the Aes Sedai are only interested in capturing and stopping the false dragons, and so the real dragon is free to do as he will and bring about the fulfillment of prophecies. Egwene asks Rand where he'll go and if he'll go with her and Nynaeve to Tar Valon, and when he says he won't, she asks if he'll go home. Rand then thinks of his father Tam and everyone else that he cares for there, and even though he's just made an oath with himself to never touch the One Power again lest he go mad or worse, he realizes that he never really knew what he was doing when he was using it, and so he decides that he can't go home. He can't say for sure that he won't hurt someone that he cares about, and so after an entire book of pining for home and his father, he says, "Not home, never home." And that, my friends, is the heartbreaking end to The Eye of the World, Book 1 of The Wheel of Time. Okay, it's time to break down some of my overall thoughts about the book. I've heard some complaints about this book that the entire thing is just one long journey of traveling and it gets old for some people. And I will admit there were a couple of times that it felt like it was starting to drag for me, like Rand dragging along a half-crazed blindfolded Mat and doing the same thing day in and day out. But that timeline was interspersed with the other adventures well enough that I didn't mind so much.
I don't mind so much.
Generally, I actually don't mind a travel-based fantasy novel. My favorite book in the Chronicles of Narnia is Voyage of the Dawn Treader, which most people dislike for the same reason, so I really think this book was just right up my alley. A complaint that I did have about the book, however, which I've already touched on some, is when the whole group is together, we only get Rand's point of view. Rand is just fine as a protagonist, but especially once the group has separated and we've gotten used to other people's perspectives, to get crammed back into only Rand's head was a little disappointing. Another quick thing that I wanted to break down in a classic fantasy novel, however, is women in the story. First off, there are happily quite a few main female characters in this story, far more than J.R.R. Tolkien, etc., which is really nice as a female reader. Moiraine gets about the same amount of characterization as Lan, namely that they are cool and mysterious and very strong and have way more to them than we know at this point. I really like that balance between them. Nynaeve is my personal favorite, not just woman in the book, but character. She's so compelling because we see her fully embrace her role as wisdom, while also being fully aware that she's the most powerful person in the village, so if anyone is going to bring the kids back safely, it's her. Beyond that, there is this constant tension between her love for her role as the wisdom and her desire to be something more. So when the idea comes up to be trained to use the One Power as an Aes Sedai, it does become appealing to her. She's also older and therefore more mature than the other POV characters, which is a breath of fresh air. My main complaint is that for a series as long as this, why did Robert Jordan rush that romance between her and Lan? When the groups are separated, the tension between her and Lan is just baby tension, like just past the point of annoyance and into intrigue on their parts. Then the group gets back together and we only hear Rand's POV, and then literal days later we overhear Nynaeve and Lan talking about marriage? What? That's too much of a jump for me. It happens way too fast. And how dare he skip the most interesting parts of a romance? That cannot happen off screen, are you kidding? It's also just too fast literally as an audience. We don't really get the time to consider the romance, see it, feel it, care for it. Instead, a few days after you start to catch the vibes, they talk about marriage, Lan shoots her down, and Nynaeve cries about it. Like, I'm sorry, that isn't enough time for me to really feel the pain. It's a shame. Egwene was also a super fun character. She gives me strong Belle from Beauty and the Beast vibes. She wants adventure, she has a plan, and she's gonna make it happen. Egwene also has a lot of agency in the book and is a discreet character in the way that a lot of authors fail to achieve. My main complaint is that she didn't get a POV, but Mat didn't go in either, so it really just feels like that's kind of how it shook out. My main takeaway from the women in this book is that they all have distinct personalities and they all have agency. They are where they are for a reason, and they make realistic choices. So that's a 10 out of 10 on women in the book, and I really hope the series keeps it up. Alright, that's the summary and my review of Wheel of Time, Book 1, The Eye of the World. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, and please give this video a like if you liked it. Also remember to stick around for my upcoming video, Wheel of Time, Book 1, The Eye of the World, Part 2, where I compare the book to the TV series. If you liked this video, you might be interested in watching my reaction to reading Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone for the first time, and stick around for my reaction to Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Feel free to follow my Goodreads, Instagram, etc., all of which are Emily at Midnight and linked in the description below. And don't forget to have a wonderful day, treat people with respect, and pick up a book. Then they all head off towards Caemlyn, hoping to find Rat and Mand. Then they all head toward Caemlyn, hoping to find Rat and Mand. Damn it! Oh, good thing I can have a blooper reel on this one.